Hello and welcome, everyone. We are live and Zoom, which is wonderful for us. We're so thankful that you are here. We do not take that for granted. And so grateful that you joined us for this program and especially our speaker. First of all, many of you are familiar with wildlands, but for those who might be new to wildlands, basically our overall concept is native plants and natural landscapes. So I'm going to read our mission to promote environmentally sound landscaping practices and to preserve biodiversity through the preservation, restoration, and establishment of native plant communities. Our local chapter here is called Les Hills Wildlands, and our board members are co-presidents Don Snyder and myself, Ruth Rose, co-vice presidents Tom and Sherry Stewart, Secretary Danielle Metzger, and also our tech savvy person, Treasurer Marcy Ponder. There's Marcy. And Marcy is also responsible for our grants this year, which we'll talk about a little bit. Our membership co-chairs are also Marcy and Danielle. And our board emeritus is Diane Blankenship, who I'm sure is familiar to many of you. We look forward to a fun and really productive growing season. And on our upcoming calendar, save the dates. Our next program is May 6th. It is at 10 a.m. and it's Wildflowers of Fowler Forest. And it's a hike with Don Snyder from the Nature Center. Then our spring plant sale would be posted at Sherry and Tom Stewart's home. And that is May 19th through May 21st. So hopefully we'll correspond with some plants that we see in this program. Also, we have, as I said, the really exciting grants to offer. We have two types of grants available right now. We have 5 grants of $500 each, which are for nonprofit organizations. And we have 5 grants that are members only of a free flat plants from the spring plant sale. So if you want to apply for those, there's more information at the back of the room, or if you go onto our website and scroll down, you'll see in bright blue, you can apply either through a online electronic, or you can download a grant and send that in. Whatever is easiest for you. Okay, I think that's all I have. And once again, I thank you so much for joining us. We thank Julie in advance for joining us here today. She is from Polk County, and I will let her introduce herself. Under rainwater.
Do I have to stand up here? Or
No,
Okay.
you can go wherever you want. So as I can hear you.
Sounds good. Well, yes, thanks for having me here today. As she said, my name is Julie Perreault, and I work for Polk County Conservation as a volunteer coordinator currently. Previously, though, for about 5 years, I was a watershed coordinator working on a lake renovation project with the Iowa DNR and a bunch of other partners. And one of my primary jobs back then was to work with residents, homeowners, and businesses to install what we call best management practices for stormwater. So things like rain barrels, rain gardens, native landscaping, you name it. So to date, I've done probably 1,000 house visits. Trying to help people read the landscape in their own backyard better, how they can manage water, and how they can better incorporate native plants. So that's how I kind of got into the rain garden business here, and why I guess my parents who are here, I think, offered up my presentation to the group today. So yeah, so I've worked with lots of landowners, lots of contractors, and I've helped install a couple rain gardens in my day. So throughout this presentation, if you have questions regarding your own landscape, anything I'm saying, feel free just to interject or raise your hand throughout this presentation. I'd much rather focus this on what you actually want to learn today instead of just me talking at you the whole time. So without further ado, I'm going to give you a good kind of overview of what rain gardens are in the context of Iowa, and give you some kind of tips and tricks to understand where, give you some information so you can know where to start if you're thinking about building a rain garden at your house or your church or anywhere else in your community. So I guess there we go. So the first thing I always like to talk about is why should we have rain gardens? Hopefully some of you in this room have some ideas what that might be. But I always like to refresh this topic every time I talk about rain gardens. And if you're curious about this rain garden here, this is actually a rain garden up in the Minneapolis area, in the Capital Region Watershed District. You'll see this rain garden pictured a couple times just because I think it's a very well done one. It looks very pretty. We could talk about more later. But yeah, why rain gardens? First things first, I mentioned earlier, I was a watershed coordinator for, so I care a lot about water quality and our watersheds and what we can do to improve them, especially in the state of Iowa, where we are not exactly known for having good water quality. So in this picture, if you don't know what a watershed is simply an area in which all water drains to a certain point. So the middle third of the United States is part of the Mississippi watershed. Hopefully you know that, and all drains to the Gulf of Mexico. But yeah, no matter where you are at on planet Earth, if you are standing on land, you are in a watershed. And that's a really important concept to understand. Within kind of the Central United States, we get broken up into these kind of larger sub-watersheds. Here in the Sioux City area, we're part of the Missouri watershed. Obviously, we have the Missouri River, not too far away from here. And then from there, you can keep kind of breaking down into sub-watersheds where you're getting, more of your local water, you can understand where that's going to. So it's kind of breaking that down a little further. And then you can go even further down where in the Sioux City area, we got the Floyd River watershed, the Big Sioux, Little Sioux rivers. Then you could even go down to like Perry Creek, or, look at maybe it's Browns Lake, or, some sort of water body. All is going to have its own watershed. But lots of our watersheds in the state of Iowa, lots of our rivers and our lakes and places we like to recreate or fish, they all have problems. So this is a map from the Iowa DNR from 2022. This is our impaired waterways map. As you can see, most of the state has impaired waterways. The red lines are areas where through EPA, we actually have established total maximum daily loads for the major pollutant sources. So maybe things like bacteria or phosphorus or nitrate levels. And then the yellow areas are areas of concern that haven't reached. There aren't quite as bad as the red areas, but just kind of zoomed into Iowa or the Sioux City area. Of course, parts of the Missouri River are impaired, but then also Perry Creek. I think that's this little guy. Then you got the Floyd River. Then you got Browns Lake. I can't remember. Is it Snyder's Bend? Yep. So those are all impaired too. So when we think about rain gardens or water conservation topics, I like to bring attention to these because when you think about the really big rivers we have, how do we fix the Mississippi River or the Des Moines River or the Missouri? It all starts with our smaller watersheds and the creeks that we all have behind our own houses, because all of that water is draining into these larger systems. And so if we think about the watershed and, the land that each of us owns at our houses, we can help improve our local watershed by things like the rain garden to help eliminate these problems. That's just a little bit about watersheds. And then I can't talk about rain gardens without going a little bit into Iowa's land history. I know this group is probably pretty well aware of what Iowa used to be, but I just like to highlight this. So this is actually a map of the Des Moines Metro. Where the black is, that's the current outlines of the Des Moines area. And the tan areas represent where the tall grass prairie once was. This is from the General Land Office survey from the 1840s to 1860s. And then in Des Moines, we are a little bit farther east. So along a lot of our waterways, that's where you would see those green areas in the forest or oak savanna-like areas. So that's where I'm from, the Des Moines area where I'm at right now. But then I pulled this from Iowa State, kind of zoomed in. So this is the General Land Office survey from 1832 to 1859. Same thing, the tan areas represent where it would have been historical tall grass prairie. So in this part of the state, it's a lot drier. You have less precipitation up here, but we would have had actually a lot more tall grass prairie than even, the Des Moines area. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of an insight into what Sioux City would have looked like prior to development of the city. So yeah, and yeah, you can actually access this map from Iowa State online. You can zoom in and look at the entire state if you're curious. Just to kind of see what that used to look like. So, what did that prairie look like? I always love to talk about the Doolittle Prairie. That's in Story County. So around Iowa State, it's really close to there. But you see this awesome species diversity. You had super high infiltration rates. Research tells us that the historical prairie could have absorbed about 6 inches of rainwater runoff, or rainwater before generating runoff. The only times you probably would have experienced lots of runoff would be if we had, a year with excess rains, or maybe if we had a weird freeze thaw cycle, or in the wintertime during spring thaw season. And then, yeah, so overall, these native plants, many of they have so super deep roots that really help to build that awesome soil profile that Iowa is known for. That's very granular, stores tons of water. It's like a giant sponge. And I guess when we talk about roots, the big thing that people always realize is that that sponge really happens because every single year, a third of those super deep roots are decaying and leaving those open pore spaces, plus all of the other critters and bugs and things that are growing in it. So yeah, this awesome landscape with lots of wetlands, prairie potholes, just like the awesome beauty here. I'm sure everybody know what some of these plants are in this photo. Yeah, some of my favorites are here. I just want to like call out what those are.
Rattlesnake master.
Yeah. And what's this purple one? Yep, yeah, Trace, and then I think, I don't know if that's actually purple flower or, yeah, so beautiful stuff in there. Rattlesnake master is one of my favorites just because it looks like a desert and are super unique. But those actually both work really well in rain gardens. We'll talk more about that later. So yeah, kind of mentioned this before. This is once again another picture of from Story County Conservation. In there, I think we got some Monarda species, maybe some ironweed. But yeah, you know, we have this giant sponge. So you look at the history of Iowa's landscape, almost our entire state was this giant sponge, right? And now it looks a lot different. We don't have these awesome deep roots. This is a picture from the U.S. Botanic Gardens where they have grown the prairie plants. This one in this picture is about 5'3" or 5'4". And if you look at the picture closely, those roots, they're not just long, they're also long and tied up. You know, that's what we had before. You know, so our topsoil, maybe if any of you have excavated your backyards before, you just have that awesome black topsoil all the way down. And on our backyard here in Sioux City, where I grew up, we had that awesome soil profile. We built a retaining wall and cut some of it out, but you know, there is this awesome thing that we used to have here. Nowadays, looks a lot more like this. You know, if you think about the South Sioux City side, you know, it used to be a bunch of soccer fields. There's still soccer fields there, but slowly there's more developing on our floodplain. We have this giant storm drain network that is draining all of these parking lots. Not only parking lots and roads, but we have lots and lots of compacted soils. Hopefully many of you are aware when we do housing developments, oftentimes the topsoil is stripped off and then sold. And then what you're left with is a bunch of compacted clay soils. That could be an issue. You know, turf grass typically only absorbs about 1/4 inch of water before generating runoff. So that's a huge difference from that 6 inches that you would have maybe had with the historical prairies. So that's causing a lot of issues. So yeah, basically we've designed our cities to collect water as fast as we possibly can, get it off our landscape as easily and centralized and controlled as we possibly can. And that's causing a lot of issues. Our historical landscape would have slowly absorbed that, held it in that soil profile. And then this system has definitely changed it to give us really flashy flows. We can't absorb water as quickly. And we have all this giant storm drain network. So something I always like to say is that if you live in a city and you have storm drains, you live on water, you have waterfront property. You may not see the lakes or the rivers, but your water off your house and your street, it is going to a local water body somewhere. So the last thing that I tell my family this, I tell people, a lot of people think that our storm drains, that water is treated before it goes into a river or lake. It's not, it just goes straight from the pipe underground into the nearest water body. So it's really important concept to understand. There's that. So yeah, just looking at your typical house, just like think about your own house. You know, how much rooftop space do you have? How big is your driveway? Do you have lots of sidewalks? Do you have a big old patio in the back? How much turf grass lawn do you have? How much water do you think that's absorbing? Just kind of think about that. It's a ton of runoff. We can do some simple math to try to figure out how much water that is. This is a very typical house in Des Moines, the watershed I used to work with. This lot size is about 9,200 square foot. Typical lot these days is about 1/4 acre. And the impervious area, so the rooftop, the sidewalk and the driveway, the area outlined in green, that's what we consider the impervious area. That in this example is about 3,500 square feet. The average rainfall in Des Moines when I made this was about 35 inches per year. Does anybody know what the average rainfall is in Sioux City? I know it's a little bit less than 29. Yep, so a little bit less. So you'll have a little less water, but just doing some basic math. If we were to assume that every drop of water, you know, of that rainfall were to actually run off your property into a storm drain, you can just take that, you know, the square footage times your average rainfall times the conversion factor, 0.623. In this example, that could generate, you know, over 76,000 gallons of stormwater runoff a year, just from one property. And then if you consider the turf grass lawn, which in this case, I know this yard is super compacted, it's not really absorbing any water either. So now add all that green space on top of that. That's just what's coming off of one property, because we don't have natives or we don't have good soils. So big problem, you think about an entire neighborhood. So this is the Des Moines Airport here, and all the yellow lines represent where all the storm drains are in the city of Des Moines, and then every green dot is a stormwater discharge point. So if you're familiar with Des Moines at all, the entire city has over 25,000 storm drain intakes and even more, and a couple less outlet structures. But that blue line represents a creek that where the Des Moines Airport is the headwaters for, drains into a lake I used to work with. You know, so all of that water from this city is just going straight into that creek untreated. It's going there very quickly, very fast, and it's causing lots of issues with the stream bank erosion and just degrading a recreational resource. So you think about within any of our areas, if you know, the stormwater is a medium that transports a ton of pollution. So it could be just simply who washes their car in their driveway? Anybody? Anymore? That used to be a lot more common, you know, all this soap, all those waxes, all that stuff is going down the water somewhere. If you have pets, you know, that dog waste can cause a lot of E. coli issues. Dog waste carries lots and lots of bacteria and viruses in it. Your fertilizers, if you are using fertilizer, you know, you're just adding more phosphorus to that system. Grass clippings, leaves, if those are in the street, those are going into your storm drains. It only takes 1 pound of phosphorus to generate 300 to 500 pounds of algae blooms within like a lake. So, you know, all these things are all being carried by stormwater that's running off of our homes, causing lots and lots of issues. So, you know, there's very obvious things. You might see trash flowing in our waterways, or in this picture, you can see a giant sediment plume. So if you had a construction site or maybe just bare ground, you know, all that water is running off and just adding sedimentation to our lakes and waterways, which is a huge problem in the state of Iowa. And then, of course, with storm drain networks, pipes underground don't have floodplains. So when we get massive rains in our cities, especially with climate change, as we have increased precipitation levels, overall, our engineered drainage system, it isn't designed to handle these excess amounts of water. We don't have as many wetlands. We don't have the prairie potholes we used to have. So you get cases like this of flash flooding. In 2018, city of Des Moines, we got 10 inches of rain in less than an hour in our city. So one of our creeks, 4 Mile, it flooded like crazy. So we had, I mean, it was millions of dollars of federal funding. We removed over 90 homes. Now we have this awesome greenway that we're working on, but you know, this is a really common problem for a lot of our communities. And that's that flash flooding, because our landscape can't absorb the water like it used to, and our engineered gray infrastructure systems like storm drains and pipes, they can't handle this, especially as we get higher levels of precipitation or if it falls incredibly fast. So then you get issues like this. So a lot of the times your storm drains, they outlet through a single point. And then when you have increased really high levels of stormwater coming through that pipe, it's basically power washing this stream bank away. This is a real picture from Des Moines. In this case, it's someone's backyard. You know, they're losing a few feet every single year. Where I grew up, it's right by the Southern Hills Mall. I remember as a kid, we had a flash flooding case. They moved a house. There's huge erosion. We have all this mall water, Sargent Road. It all comes out a single discharge point. When I was a kid, I remember playing in the creek, and then over time, it's gotten deeper. There was a pond at one point in time. It just keeps widening. And now there's, you know, 100+ foot drops of the creek just because there's so much water coming out of it. So this is a really, really big issue. I don't know that a lot of Iowans actually know what a healthy stream or stream bank should look like. It's definitely not this. You know, it should be vegetated. You might see a little bit of erosion, but you know, it shouldn't be, you know, 8 to 10 feet deep. It should be pretty shallow. You know, of course, the Missouri River is a bigger water system, so you're going to see more stream bank there, but this is not what nature would have done. This is all just from increased levels of stormwater and all that stormwater getting off of our houses very quickly into these systems, causing these types of issues, which then of course creates huge issues for you as a homeowner. I often tell people to never buy a house with a creek in the backyard. I will never do it myself, just because I've dealt with too many homeowners with this issue. And to fix that is at least, you know, just building a retaining wall could be, you know, 50 grand for this homeowner just to stabilize that. So it's a pretty costly issue. So yeah, earlier I mentioned I was a watershed coordinator working with the lake renovation project. So I'm just going to show you some effects of what stormwater did to that project. So this is Easter Lake. It's on the south side of Des Moines. It's a great county park with, boating and fishing. But it was a man-made lake built in 1967, and between 1967 and 2012, it lost 30% of its volume due to sedimentation, and 60% of the sediment in that lake is attributed to stream bank erosion. So that picture I showed you with the blue line and all the yellow dots and green things, that's the creek that flows into this lake. So if you look in the picture, the kind of farthest west arm just looks really brown, kind of like where all like the major waters coming in. It was very, very filled in from that stream bank erosion. So we were doing lake renovations. We did empty the lake a little bit, but this is supposed to be a bay of the lake where you could go fishing. As you can see, it's just chock full of sediment. You could see geese walking across it from a recreational resource standpoint. I met landowners who were learning how to fish here, and this used to be, it was like 12 feet deep in this area. Wow. Maybe got like 6 inches at this point. So yeah, that's just stream bank erosion. Here's another picture while we were kind of digging out a giant sediment basin. You can just see how much soil built up. Just remember this, we were draining the lake at this point, which is why it's a lot more obvious, but you can just see there's nothing there. I'm happy to say that today, this same bay is about 10 feet deep again, because we dredged it out and spent a lot of money to do that. But this is what it did look like back in this would have been 2015. So with all that bad news, all the problems, we're like, what the heck can we do about this? There's so much stormwater everywhere. I only have my house, or, what can I do? Well, I like to say there's lots of things that you as an individual landowner can do, and no act is too small. So one of my favorite things to talk about is rain gardens, partially because they're a beautiful landscaping feature. They utilize native plants, which not only helps with the water issues and beautifies your landscape, but it also really, really helps restore habitat back in our neighborhoods. When it comes to habitat, if you are reading maybe the works of Douglas Talmany, you guys know the book Bringing Home Nature, or a lot of his stuff, one of the things that he's famous for is the idea of the homegrown national park. We're going to really bring back biodiversity into our communities. Even if our parks were pristine natural landscapes, it's still not enough within our cities. Our best chance for bringing back biodiversity is actually in our neighborhoods. There's a lot of research to support that having little pocket pollinator gardens really can help our pollinators, so they can move very easily between those. So for those reasons, I do like rain gardens, because you're knocking out a lot of birds with one stone. Yeah, there's not really a reason not to do it unless it doesn't work for your site. Yeah, just kind of basics. A lot of people have heard about rain gardens, but within the context of Iowa, this is what we talk about. It's a landscaping feature that is functional. It captures rainfall and helps it soak into the ground. Pretty simple concept. So basically, like the picture shows, you have a shallow depression. In the state of Iowa, we typically recommend that depression is about 6 inches deep. For like at the residential scale, if you were doing a larger site, it might be 9 or 12 inches deep, or if you're limited on space, but 6 inches is definitely ideal. The bottom of that rain garden where the water collects is going to be level, so that it can disperse evenly to soak into the garden. And then it'll have amended soils, or soil that has compost, topsoil, and washed concrete sand mixed in there. And then it'll be planted with, I'd say, primarily native plants. I would say, I hope it's all native. I hope it's all native ecotype, if you can get that. It's a good source. But you could technically use non-natives too, if you just have a bunch of hostas sitting around or other plants that you want a home for. Those can also work within a rain garden. So yeah, just kind of re-emphasizing the benefits again. It's attractive, functional landscaping, adds pollinator wildlife habitat, increases that local biodiversity, helps soak up your stormwater that's generated from your home or your property. And then it just, helps to overall reduce that load of stormwater in your local watershed, which reduces a lot of the pollutant issues that we have too. So yeah, and I always like to show the picture of this butterfly, this monarch. It's one I found a few years ago, and I think it just shows like a lot of resiliency. And rain gardens is one way I think that we can bring back that resiliency to our communities. It might be a little broken, might not be perfect, but still work and still fly. So yeah, it's there. So yeah, just before I dive more into this, I just want to show you a couple examples of different rain gardens that are around in the Midwest. So this one, it's just kind of a low spot in this person's yard, right by their mailbox. A lot of people like to put flowers on their mailbox. If your yard is set up in such a way that a rain garden would work there, you could beautify your front yard landscaping while also once again having that functional landscaping feature. Here, this is a church somewhere in central Iowa. They wanted more of a Zen garden vibe, so they created this. It's very young, so the plants aren't built up, but you know, they kind of, you know, what the different style there. Still a rain garden, still following the same specs, just looks a little different. This is a rain garden. I said you could use non-natives. That wouldn't be my choice. Native, I think, is always the best way to go. But you know, they are using common species like your autumn joy sedum. There's a coneflower cultivar in there, then your daylilies. You know, that's just kind of a very obvious, like randomly placed kind of gardening yard, but you know, it can work. Looks a little more traditional. These are some gardens from up in the Minneapolis area. Once again, just different examples using a mixture of natives and non-natives. Just, yeah, all different types of ideas that you can have. This is a rain garden that I worked with back in the Easter Lake area. So this rain garden drains over 2,000 square feet of a person's rooftop. So we estimate it's probably helping to manage 16,000 gallons of stormwater runoff a year. And it just adds a nice feature to our backyard, which is right along a bike trail too. And I show that one. If you look here, it doesn't really have a very nice edge because it's just like the garden, then turf grass. And I would definitely say I always recommend having a good border between your turf grass and your native plants. But later on, the homeowner did add some nice stone around the edge. This is what's earlier in spring. So I think that combination makes it look like a really nice landscaping feature. Yeah, that's a rain garden. We recognize some plants in there.
The Columbine.
Yeah,
There's
the
a-
columbine, a red columbine, there's some spiderwort. Couple different sedges. I know this one has little blue stem in it, Jacob's ladder, swamp milkweed, butterfly milkweed. Yeah, so this is taken, there's golden Alexander. Yeah, this is early spring when we took this, so early summer. Yeah, this is an old coworker of mine. He kind of did his own kind of design, so it's a little bit different, but that's what he wanted. Like he's gonna put more plants in there at this point, but that's just what it looked like right after installation. And then this is that clean rain garden, again, that's from the Capital Region Watershed District. I like this one. In this case, it's actually collecting water off the roads. So there's a couple, you know, native cultivars in here and non-natives. But I do think, you know, for residential setting to be convincing to the neighborhood, I think this is a really good example of how they achieve that, choosing shorter plants, clumping, you know, like species together, a little bit more organized looking. And they figured out how to make it work around too. So I really like that example. So yeah, positive impacts or rain gardens. So people ask me, well, how much can one rain garden really do for all these watershed issues? There's this really cool study done up in Burnsville, Minnesota, which is a suburb of Minneapolis. And within the neighborhood, they installed rain gardens like what you see there to collect rainwater runoff from the houses and the roads. Then they had a controlled neighborhood they didn't do anything with that was very similar. And what they found is that where they implemented these rain gardens, they reduced stormwater runoff by 90%. Wow. Yeah, so this project, I can't remember the exact year they were installed, but I think it was like the early 2000s or like around 2010. If you go on Google Earth today, you can still see these rain gardens because they're still there and they're still working. I know Minneapolis for a lot of their projects, when they do things like this, they'll actually put it on the homeowner to help them maintain it. And then if they aren't maintaining it, the city will also have crews that kind of go out sporadically, just so that the neighborhood stays beautiful, then that's that community buy-in to help make gardens. But I think that's pretty cool. You know, if we had maybe a different city ordinance or more of us just had rain gardens, that's like real numbers. And studies like this have been done across the United States, where there are lots of rain gardens, and you're seeing similar numbers everywhere. I know down in the watershed I used to work at, we did a very similar study to this one where we had a control neighborhood. We didn't do any kind of stormwater projects. Then we had a test neighborhood where we did rain barrels, rain gardens, native plantings, and then even permeable paver driveway projects. We had about 30% adoption of those stormwater management practices. And we saw about a 30% reduction of stormwater. And we worked with the Iowa DNR to collect the data from our storm drains, that sort of thing. So yeah, really effective stuff. It does work. So this is the hope that I see when I think about rain gardens or native plants, because there's real data available that we can actually look at here.
So those were put in after the development was built.
Yeah, yep. So a lot of these houses, I think it was probably built like in the 90s or so, if you can kind of look at that blue house. But yeah, they built the neighborhood, and then this was the city trying to be like, hey, what can we do to manage stormwater? Because Minnesota, they have lots of recreational lakes. They need those lakes to stay, you know, algae free, be good resources. So they worked with Bar Engineering, and they designed the rain gardens, and then they did this study, and it was all post construction. So Yep, and that's how all it happens. So I bring this up. I understand we're not in Des Moines, but within Des Moines or the Cedar Rapids area, Iowa City, Coralville, a lot of the cities have stormwater issues and they have lots of emergency funds that get dedicated towards fixing stream bank erosion and other types of things. So what we have done in the Des Moines Metro is most of our cities have funding programs available to homeowners to cover 50% of the cost of things like rain gardens or native plantings. The website raincampaign.org has all that information housed on it for all the funding programs that are available in the state of Iowa and lots of other resources. But I want to bring this to your attention because as far as I know right now, Sioux City or the surrounding area doesn't have programs like this. But there's a lot that are active in the state of Iowa. And so I just want to put this bug in your ear to think about if you want to facilitate more people adopting native landscaping or rain gardens. These are real programs that cities are using and they're like very, very active across the state. So if you ever, maybe want to talk to your city council members or something similar, there's some good examples in that website would be a really good resource to kind of learn more about those programs. So yeah, raincampaign.org. And they have an Instagram, a YouTube channel, Facebook. They have a full-time coordinator now too to coordinate that website. So yeah, anyway, a little bit about that. Is there any questions about anything I've said so far? No? Okay, I'll keep going. So yeah, this is now more about like actually designing rain gardens, how they work in your yard. So rain gardens, they temporarily pond and soak in water. Typically, a rain garden will have water in it for 12 hours or less. This is the rain garden project I worked on. So it was right after installation, we got about a 2-inch rain or so. In the first picture, you can see it got a little bit wet. And then as it collects more water, it fills up. And then a few hours later, it was drained in. So it did exactly what it's supposed to do there. But to make sure that your rain garden is actually soaking in water properly, you do want to make sure that you are designing it and doing proper site investigation just to make sure that it's successful. So in the state of Iowa, we have this great resource called the Iowa Rain Garden Design and Installation Guide. This is an updated guide that we finished updating in 2021. I did actually help with this. As you can see, the front photo is a photo that we've already seen today. But it walks you through every single step that you need to build a rain garden. And you can find this guide in primarily 2 places, that raincampaign.org website, or the Iowa Stormwater Education Partnership website, which is iowastormwater.org. You can find this, it's all online, it's free to you. You can choose to purchase a hard copy, but the whole thing is on PDFs on. So everything that I'm talking about today, you can reference later through this guide. So don't feel like you have to write down everything because it is there and it is very thorough and it's pretty handy. So yeah, it covers all the topics of, what is a rain garden? How do you locate one? The different types of rain gardens based off of, soil findings that you have, helps you figure out how to estimate materials, how to find quantities. Then it talks about the whole construction process and even planting ideas and, how to plant them. So it's very thorough, like I said, it's a great resource. So this is my edition of kind of walking you through some of these concepts today that you maybe when you go home today, you can kind of almost look at your own yard a little differently and see, hey, maybe a rain garden might actually work here. So yeah, first step, locating a rain garden. So most of the time when I've worked with residents, they are looking for a way to solve a water problem in their yard. That's why they reach out to me when I was a watershed coordinator. So common problems that rain gardens were often addressing, or maybe their yard had a low spot, which water would come on during the rain. Maybe they had erosion on their foundation because of a downspout, it's causing issues, they want to redirect that water somewhere. Maybe they had wet side swales or backyards, excess water coming from a neighboring property, or else they were just looking for an alternative landscape that wasn't turf grass. These are all reasons that people commonly reached out to me for rain gardens. That's a picture of a rain garden installed by a contractor in the Beaverdale neighborhood of Des Moines. Just has a different kind of look, which I put it there. That was right after he installed it. So yeah, it's kind of like location basics for rain gardens. Like I said, this is all in that rain garden design manual, so don't feel you have to copy this all down. But there's just a couple of things you want to be careful of. Number one, you want this to be 10 feet down slope from a basement or farther away. You don't want to be infiltrating water near your foundation where you're going to cause issues for your house. You also want to be 10 feet from a foundation or a slab, 2 feet away from sidewalk if you can, 100 feet down away from a septic system. Stay away from public utilities. Digging around those isn't going to be very fun. And then, stay away from public wells. And then just watch for areas that have a high water table. If you are a person and your sump pump is running 24/7, you probably don't want to do a rain garden. It probably won't work very well just because you have so much water in your local system already. So yeah, a couple examples I'll walk you through. So this is a typical home. This yard in this case is pretty flat, has a slight slope going towards the sidewalk. But yeah, here, I just broke up the different rooftop sections. They have 4 downspouts collecting the water. And then I kind of estimated out that rough area of the grass that might be drained to different locations. So you can build rain gardens off of downspouts of your house and those low spots in your yard, where any place where water is naturally flowing to, you can potentially build a rain garden. So this is just that kind of example. Whoops, I'm flipping too fast. Now it's okay. Okay, yeah, so I think I'll actually run through the map on this later, but yeah, I mean, typically, like, if you're collecting water off a downspout, option A, you could collect that 756 square feet of, the runoff from your rooftop. If you maybe located it into that where it says option B, you can maybe collect that blue section outlining the roof, and then also that whole 2,000 square foot area of the yard, right? Those are just 2 options if you're looking at a very typical house. But kind of other things before we get into the real map of this. I just want to walk you through common questions that I always got, and they're like, well, can rain gardens work in shade? We hear that you plant Iowa natives into a rain garden, but are there ones that are, grow in shade? Hopefully this group knows that there are some fantastic options. So yes, they can work in shade. Just be conscious of your plant selection. As you can see in this example, there are things like black-eyed Susans. I think there's even hydrangeas in there. Joe Kylie, they do have hostas, but I would definitely recommend using your Iowa native woodland plants or kind of edge of woodland plants for rain garden in this kind of setting. And some of the examples of those plants would be some of these, which I know some of you have talked about already today. So like the red columbine, your wild phlox, Virginia bluebells would work fantastic in a rain garden. Or you could try different species such as great blue lobelia or cardinal flower. Kind of your low growing mounding plants, your Canada anemones or wild geraniums also work well in rain gardens. Things like shooting star, any of the plants that, can handle some water, don't need it all the time, but maybe can also handle drier periods too. It all work in a rain garden. These are just, other ideas for shade, common burr sedge, Jacob's ladder, dwarf bush honeysuckle. A lot of people know that Japanese honeysuckle is an invasive. In the southeast part of Iowa, there is a native honeysuckle. North bush honeysuckle is a very beautiful kind of low growing shrub that would work. Or native ferns or things like wild ginger. Those would all work fantastically in a shady area where you want to build a rain garden. Other questions I always get: can you plant rain gardens near trees? Yes, you absolutely can. The thing is with rain gardens, you do want to make that depression, so you will be excavating soil. You just want to make sure that you are not excavating and damaging those tree roots. When you're cutting thicker roots that go to the trunk, that's all going to damage your tree. More, I guess. And then the other thing is you want to ideally stay out of the tree's drip line. So I know what a drip line is of a tree. Outside of that farthest branches, stay out of those areas. You also want to avoid burying those roots too deep. Trees' roots are really shallow. So if you put lots of soil on top of those, you're going to harm your tree. Same reason you don't want to build multiple volcanoes, for your trees. That all just kind of threatens it. And during construction too, just want to always be conscious that you aren't putting heavy weighted equipment or materials on top of those trees, but it can work. As you've seen, there's a couple examples of gardens by trees. In this example that you kind of saw earlier, they did build a rain garden, but with that kind of river birch tree, they actually just kind of arched around it so that they did stay out of that tree strip line, so they didn't harm that tree's roots at all. But it still looks really nice next to it. Other questions: can you build rain gardens on slopes and steep grades? Absolutely. This is a rain garden in Clive, Iowa, the Des Moines area. The Public Works Director's house, actually. He did soil restoration when he built his new house, and he built a rain garden. As you can see here, when they graded his front yard, they just graded it in a way that they would get that flat bottom for the rain garden, and then it keeps going down slope. So this can happen. It takes a little bit heavier lifting. In this case, it was easier because they did this while he was building his new home, but it did work out. And then now it looks a lot prettier because the plants are a lot bigger. But in general, if you can avoid building on a hill, I definitely suggest it. Let's be easier for you. But it is an option if you don't have a flatter area that you can kind of redirect that water to. Just if you do have a hill, you'll probably have to have some sort of berm or retaining wall, or do a full out grading project like this person did. This is an example of an older home in the Des Moines area. It's kind of a cool project. The rooftop runoff actually comes off the house from the center area and it enters this black box that captures the water. So it's kind of just like a cool fountain feature. And then that kind of ponded area drains the water down the side of the house where that pink flamingo is. That low spot where it's flatter is where the actual rain garden is. And it just flows into the rest of the landscaping. This was right after installation. There's hay, erosion matting there, so I'm sure it looks a lot better now, but in this case, they did some of their landscaping that's redirected that stormwater to the flatter area and actually built the rain garden because that was a little bit easier to do. Another example, this is from, I think, St. Paul, these kind of gardens. But yeah, that person built up a pretty big berm. Once the plants are growing, I'm sure you'll barely notice the mulch there. Or this example by a church. Their berm is very well planted, so you can't see it, but it is kind of on a slope. But yeah, berms can definitely, you can really berm up any area that you want to, assuming all the other conditions are good for your garden. Lots of different ways you can kind of get creative with this. You can also hardscape your berms. Here's examples with rocks and boulders, limestone, all different things. Sky's the limit here. Just get creative with how you can kind of get that ponding depth going. Using retaining walls, and these examples, they were actually, cutting down into the hillside, so I had to build up that retaining wall. The one thing you'd want to do here is you'll want to do a deeper infiltration test, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, it's like, I'm just trying to get the idea that these things are possible. You just might have to do different things to make your site work. At the end of the day, every rain garden though does need to have a level bottom. So if you're on a slope, you just have to somehow achieve that using any of the, I guess, pictured methods that we've seen. A couple other examples of using, berms and cutting back that hillside can look super, super nice and kind of give it different textures, but yeah, those are all options. This is a really extreme example from Des Moines, but this is the contractor in the backyard. They have this tree, they're on a hillside. They chose the flat part of the hill on this rain garden left side. This is right after installation once again. When I would be working with projects and approving them, I would always have to check installation, and I oftentimes wouldn't get there 3 years later to see them be nice and beautiful. But yeah, then the front yard of this house, the contractor made a very unique system where you kind of, instead of these different boxes, that then the downspouts were in it, they're tiled in, and then they kind of flowed into one another all the way down their very steep hillside where their driveway was. So yeah, kind of an interesting project, but it did work in that case. Yeah, just other things that you can consider. If you're trying to fit a rain garden in, some of the examples you saw earlier just kind of looked like they chose the random spot in the middle of their yard. But I always like if you can kind of make them fade into maybe existing landscaping or kind of work them into a larger landscaping plan. Here this person can't really tell if there's much of a slope, but they just extended their existing landscaping, direct their downspout into that kind of newly planted area, just to extend what they already had. Worked out pretty well. This person did a very kind of linear shaped rain garden. They had some landscaping on the foundation of their house. They kicked out the rain garden portion, far enough away where it was safe from infiltrating water into their basement. And they just kind of made the rain garden be the front portion of the landscaping. So you can see there's cardinal flower, black-eyed season, looks like some prairie drop seed and different things in there. Yeah, that's another way they kind of worked it in. This house, they tiled in a downspout under their walkway. And so the rain garden's right in kind of front there by their stone path where you'll see prairie smoke and some other things. Yeah, like I said, there's lots of ways that you can work in rain gardens to kind of be disguised without just being this random thing in the middle of a yard. Yeah, one more example. I always like showing lots of examples just so you guys can visualize different things. But this isn't a rain garden, but it could potentially be one. A lot of people like to have, landscaping by your driveway or by your walkways entering a house. In this case, it's just a native planting, but they could have, maybe made this half of this a rain garden. You would have maybe trenched in a tile from your downspout. You can kind of utilize those spaces in unique ways to build a rain garden. This person, this is an example. This rain garden was not fully installed yet, but they trenched in the tile, as you can see on that picture on the left, or the right, to these rain gardens that were in different parts of the house. I'd also like to point out the homeowners landscaping beds, you can just see the difference in the color of the soil there, or the good soil is for their plants next to what they were left with post-construction of their house. Just very clay, very hard. It's very, very obvious difference of how unhealthy soils can be sometimes in our yards. But yeah, that's just an example of trenching in a tile from a downspout to redirect that water to a spot in your yard that maybe you actually do want landscaping. It doesn't always have to be right off the downspout. Yeah, just another example of a project I work with. They trench this in. Trenching in tiles can work, but you do have to always make sure that the water is flowing downhill. So I felt there's a couple of college kids that were digging out this trench by hand when I took this picture. They had to dig a really, really deep trench to make this garden work. It did work, but it took a lot of hard labor. So maybe hire somebody out, or rent a actual trencher to do this if you do on your own. But yeah, there's also cases where rain gardens don't always work. And so I just like to highlight this just so that if you do have this type of situation, you aren't thinking that a rain garden can solve your problems. So yeah, this is an example of a backyard drainage soil where they have about 15 houses all draining to the backyard area. So this is kind of like a rule of thumb is a rain garden is good to manage about 11,000 square feet worth of water, or like a quarter acre lot is what that is. So it's good to manage a rooftop or part of your yard. It's not going to work to manage your water runoff and 10 of your neighbors. It's just the wrong scale of solution for that type of issue. So yeah, they work, but if you want to manage more water, you really have to go to different types of solutions. So yeah, in this type of case, you have that backyard drainage, so you have all these homes all coming together. So to fix the problem to the people at the bottom of the hill, what could work is if all the neighbors uphill all did something in their yards, like a rain garden or just more native landscaping, soil quality restoration, that type of stuff to manage that water. But if you can't build a rain garden and you do want to manage your water, I would just say in that case, just plant native buffer zones to help manage that, because the rain garden probably isn't going to work. I would talk more on that. I just want to get through a couple more things. Before you build a rain garden, one of the things you definitely need to do is a soil test. You just are really looking for whether or not your soils have too much clay or too compacted, or if you do have a good kind of soil situation. That rain garden design and installation guide walks you through 3 different ways you can do a soil test, using a soil ribbon test, an infiltration test, just to see before adding amended soils, how much water can soak in. Typically, you're looking for about a 1 inch per hour percolation rate. If you can get it, if your site isn't taking in any water, it's probably not going to be a very successful rain garden. It might just be stagnant water, which might kill your plants, which you just wouldn't want. So these things are very important to talk about. Like I said, the rain garden design installation guide, it does walk you through everything. So I'm not going to cover that today. I'm just highlighting it, that this step of the process is there. So after you maybe figured out, hey, I think a rain garden can work in maybe a couple locations in your yard, the next step you want to go to is do a basic soils test. Just to see what your current condition is. Then the next thing you can do is a percolation test, where if you say, hey, the soils look good. Now let's test 2 or 3 sites within that rain garden area and see just how much water is soaking in. This kind of walks you through. You might dig down 18 inches and just see how much water soaks in. And that'll give you a good indication of if it will be a good site or not. Like I said, the guide will walk you through this and give you a little more explanation. Yeah, your basic rain garden. This is kind of what the cross section would look like. You're going to excavate down your good site, and then you're going to excavate down far enough so you can add an amended soil layer, your mulch, and then your plants. So you can have that 6-inch ponding depth to collect the water off the rooftop or whatever that you're trying to do. So I know I'm like running out of time, so I'm trying to rush through this just a little bit. But the rain garden design installation guide, it's going to walk you through how to design a rain garden that can manage 1.25 inches of rain. That is because that's what we consider the water quality volume in the state of Iowa. And what that is, it's basically 90% of storms in Iowa apparently are 1.25 inches. So if we can capture that first flush of stormwater off your house, that's what really will help us reduce pollution into our waterways, which is why this guide is designed to help you figure out how to do it for that size. So based off your drainage area, like if you had a 100 square foot roof, 10% of that drainage area is the square footage of your rain garden. So you have 10 square foot rain garden. Yeah, so I'll just keep going forward. Like I said, I am running out of time here, so I just am trying to sail through this. So yeah, these drainage areas calculations, using that previous example, Let's say you were trying to build a rain garden in that option A, so you're just trying to manage the rooftop of that 756 square foot area. All you would do is assuming that you want that 6-inch ponding depth and you found that your percolation rate was 1 inch per hour. There's a very basic equation. You're taking 10% of your drainage area. So in this case, your rain garden will be 76 square feet. Right, does that make sense? 10% of your drainage area, that's the size of your rain garden, roughly speaking. You can also make it bigger, but that's like a minimum that you would need for that. So the rain garden design installation guide, if you download the PDFs, they have these calculation sheets. You literally just put in the numbers, and it calculates sizes and everything for you. That's one of the big upgrades we did this last time we upgraded that guide. So don't let this map confuse you. It's very, very simple. This is just another example. Assuming that you wanted to now build a rain garden in the area of option B. So you're going to take that drainage area from the rooftop plus the grass area. Any landscaped area or grass, you'll just assume your drainage area is half of that green space plus all of the rooftop in this area. So your total drainage area is going to be the roof space plus half of the 2,309 square foot from the grass. And that's going to give you your total drainage area. And then you just take that times, once again, assuming you have a good percolation rate, that'll give you the size of your garden there. I wish I could spend more time to explain this, but I just don't want to cut this too short. The other thing you can do is if you wanted to improve just the turf grass areas, you can call it soil quality restoration. This is where you are deep tine aerating your yard and spreading compost over top. If you do this process on your turf grass, you would not have to include your turf grass into the calculation of your drainage area because this process will help to infiltrate that first 1.25 inches of rain. This is a great option for a healthy, chemical way to improve your lawn. It's also a great way to soak in water. So if you were to do that process, you wouldn't include the green space in that rain garden calculation. So yeah, calculation sheets, these are just examples. If you download the PDFs of the rain garden guide, once you find your, how big is your rooftop and how much is your roof base, what your percolation rates are, you just click those numbers into the boxes and it spits out all the numbers that you need for how big your rain garden should be. It's very, very simple. So yeah, estimating materials. I did mention that you do need mulch for rain gardens for planting your plants and you want to have amended soils. So once you excavate your soils, out of the ground for the rain garden, you're going to amend them with a mixture of washed concrete, sand, compost, and topsoil. And the guide's going to walk you through how to calculate all that based off of your rain garden size. Trust me, when you read the guide, all this just is very, very simple and it's very laid out. So I'm rushing through this. So you're having a hard time keeping up. Just know that it's very easy. So yeah, for a rain garden that would have that 6-inch ponding depth, have a pretty decent percolation rate of at least 0.5 inch to 1 inch per hour. That amended soil mixture is going to be a basic combination of 2 inches of topsoil, 3.5 inches of washed concrete sand, and then 0.5 inch of compost for a total of 6 inches of amended soils in your bottom of your rain garden. So the guide, it does walk you through how to calculate all this and then even does conversions for you. If you are purchasing stuff in cubic yards, tons, whatever it is, it'll do all that for you. I listed out all the math, but I'm not going to walk you through that this time. There's lots of conversions. So yeah, in this example, let's assume our rain garden was 191 square feet. This just kind of walks you through the conversion factors to figure out what you would need for sand. Then just tells you if you want cubic feet, cubic yards, pounds, tons, wherever you're buying it from, and leave those numbers. The sheets, thank goodness, just calculate all that for you. I'm going to skip through this, just another example of that. I've said this before, but iowastormwater.org is where that guide lives. So if you just want to reference that later, that's where I would go. And then once you go to the site, if you just go to the Rainscaping Iowa tab at the top, you'll eventually pull up the rain garden page, and that's where you'll actually find the guide there. Just a reminder on that. I don't have time today to talk about actual construction of the rain garden, but the guide does walk you through that too. Of, how do you, lay out the area? How do you excavate it properly so that you aren't compacting soils or smearing them so they still soak in the water? Different tools recommended, kind of tips and tricks. That's all in the guide too. I'm just not going to cover it today because we don't really have that much time. So I always forget how much I can talk. So until I get here. So yeah, for rain gardens, I highly recommend use native plants for your planting design, just because they do have the deep roots. There's not many things that you can build that get better with time. But if you do have compacted soils, if you amend them and then you plant with native plants, over time, those roots are really going to help break up the soils and just infiltrate more water. The very first rain garden you saw on the opening slide today, that rain garden was built probably 10 years ago now. And in the last 5 years, I've never actually seen water pond in it because it just all infiltrates instantly. So that's something that happens just because those roots really do help to restore those soils over time. But I do have a couple tips and tricks for residential settings where you want to kind of avoid, wild and untamed gardens. Definitely recommend, planting plants in groups or clumps of at least 3 to 3 plants. That can kind of help make it look a little bit more organized and give it a little bit more structure. Definitely give it some sort of border to make it look intentional. That border could be, flagstone edging. It could be a border of prairie drop seed like you see in that picture in the fall. It could be a combination of a couple of plants that come together. Those things will really help tell your neighbors that, this is a purposeful planting. These are all plantings in our parks in Des Moines, except the very top one, that's from the Walmart Blue Cross Blue Shield headquarters. But trying to emphasize the point of what clumping plants together can look like. Another thing, just, choose plants that have good structure to them. Like in these examples, you have the red columbine. That's a very dainty plant. That one. There's lots of natives like that. I would never plant a rain garden with all those because it'll look very, very, very wild, which you might love, but maybe you want some more organized looking, so using things like little blue stem, that's just a mass planting of it in a park in Des Moines, or using shrubs or things like Baptisia species that you'll see, the blue wild indigos is Baptisia. Those are all things that just have a little bit more form to them. So if you mix those with, areas that are a little bit more wild, that's going to give you a lot kind of more structure and help with your design here. In some of these examples, you see a low growing sedge or a grass with other taller plants kind of popping out of that throughout the year. That's one way you can kind of organize your garden a little bit. There's a lot to plant design. Earlier, before some of you got here, we mentioned P.A. O'Dolph as a landscaper that uses native plants and their wild nature expertly. So these are images from the New York High Line. So they changed an old railway line into a walking park. And I think he uses this concept of grouping plantings super, super well. So you always have like low growing grasses or sedges, and then throughout the year, he'll choose different species that kind of pop out, have different kind of color variations throughout the year. So there's always something blooming, and there's just a wide variety of textures and colors. So the group plantings, it can make it easier for maintenance, kind of gives that cue for care, makes it not look as crazy. And it's just very interesting to look at. So yeah, this is from the New York High Line there. And this is another picture of the High Line, but you can just see, here there's clumps of plants, but there's also like waves of those clumps of plants throughout the landscape. So within your rain garden, if it's a bigger space or just native landscaping, these are all kind of concepts that you can use. If you were to plant the entire base of your rain garden with a sedge or low growing grass variety, that's a really good way to naturally outcompete weeds too. Then throughout the year, maybe you could have a jokai weed come out of that, or your butterfly milkweed grows, or your early spring bloomers. There's like, you kind of create like a symphony of flowers throughout the year. That's kind of one way to do it. And it looks just super good too. But yeah, high diversity is one of the best things you can do for wildlife. So there are plantings, this is in downtown Des Moines, that come and go headquarters. This is their landscaping right there. It is planted a native prairie. Looks very wild, but it's also beautiful. So if that's the look that you're going for, there's nothing wrong with that. That can also work in a rain garden. So if you just have your, 20 favorite native plants that like a little bit of water and can tolerate some dry times too, go for it. Like, I think there's a lot that can be said for transforming our neighbors' views of what a garden should look like. And this is a good way to do it. And when you can explain to them what the function is, those are all things that can help. Yeah, full examples, wild can also be beautiful. So yeah, the guide, it does give some ideas of plant layouts. Now, maybe you won't like these, maybe you won't, but there's also a list of plants that are Iowa natives that do work well in rain gardens. There's a whole bunch of ideas in there. If you don't know where to start, definitely reference that book. And it can just give you some quick summaries of things that you could do, or at least give you a starting point to design your own garden. So yeah, installing plant. My quick tip for this is put your mulch down first once you got all your soils laid out. and then just plant into that. The other thing, so in these pictures, these are rain gardens that are collecting street water in the city of Des Moines. One thing you will notice is that on these pictures, the water is coming straight in through a curb cut. But before the plants were established, they actually put these plates on so that the water couldn't enter the garden. That's a pretty decent idea when you have a new rain garden is, you know, maybe your plants actually water them, but maybe keep water out of the system, especially with a lot of water coming in. Those are all things that can just kind of help protect your landscape before it's a little bit more established. That's a very common practice when we do install rain gardens. So yeah, maintenance tips. Most of you probably know a lot more about native plants than the average person since you are here today. But I always like to say, you know, you don't need to know every single weed and every single plant. When you do choose your plants, I recommend make a binder for yourself with your plant list and then take pictures of those plants when they are very, very young and then when they're growing throughout the season, and then make yourself a lookbook. And then the next season, you'll know exactly what you're looking for. What's a weed, what's not a weed. There's, you know, good websites out there. Minnesota Wildflowers is one of my favorite, or the Missouri Botanical Garden website is also fantastic for plants. Or, you know, there's different apps out there for your phone that can help you identify stuff. So yeah, I definitely recommend make yourself a lookbook for your exact rain garden. Other things just to mention about native plants, a lot of people I've worked with, they are terrified of thinning out their natives or pulling them out completely. As your landscape matures in your rain garden, it's okay to pull those plants out. You can add stuff over time. You want to switch it out, that's fine. You're not going to ruin your rain garden at all. So just know, just like you can change it out, you can spin it, you can cut stuff, you can divide it, give it to a friend. That's all fine. You will not ruin your rain garden that way. This is just an example of me learning my own plants and just taking pictures of that growing season. I didn't study plants when I went to Iowa State. I focused a lot more on water resources. So I learned all of my native plants just by going on walks next to native plantings and taking lots of pictures. So this is Penstemon digitalis, or Greater Flora, sorry, large flowered beard tongue. I used to not be able to notice it in the rosette stage, but honestly, after doing this myself of just documenting plants at different stages, I now don't question the early season rosette stage of even like grasses these days. Or some more difficult species. So this is my tip for you is just if you don't know your natives quite yet, this works for me. Maybe it can work for you too if you're having a hard time. So yeah, with that, you know, just other kind of more pictures of just other things you can do to make gardens look more intentional. Beyond the planting design, of course, the edges and the borders we talked about earlier. Clumping things, having, you know, a very obvious edge, things such as this, these people's front yards. You know, it's just a wild kind of grass thing, but you know, that very front row is the shorter black-eyed Susans. It looks like autumn sedum here. So yeah, just very obvious borders, that type of stuff works. With that, it is exactly 3, well, a little past 3, so I'm going to stop there. That was a lot of information. But that's just a little bit about rain gardens and ultimately just letting you know that Iowa Rain Garden Design and Installation Guide, it exists. And that is an awesome resource for you within the state of Iowa to know how to build rain gardens. So with that, I'm going to stop there. And yes, yeah, thank you for letting me speak to you today. Yes, are there any questions from anybody? The Iowa Rain Garden Design and Installation Guide. So if you just go to iowastormwater.org, that is where you will find that resource.
I wish I would have been told to block the water when you're kind of working on your rain garden because I got my mulch all in and then we had this huge rainstorm
Yep.
that washed all my mulch away because I hadn't even had a chance to put my plants in yet or anything. Just down the
Yes.
rain, down
Yep,
the
so it's
rainstorm
like
it
something
went.
we
I'm like,
directed. The other thing with mulch is double shredded hardwood mulch tends to work best in rain gardens because it like just is a little more fibrous and sticks together better, so it tends to stay in place better. So yeah, double shredded hardwood mulch is the best way to go. So yeah. Any other questions? I'm sorry I had to fly through that so quickly, but there's a lot to it, but it's actually a rather simple concept. With that, we'll end there, I suppose.
Well, thank you so
Yeah.
very much. I really appreciate your coming.
That was really